This is episode 658 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Daniel Turner. He is the founder and executive director of Power the Future. We have had Larry Barons on somewhat regularly. Well, Daniel is Larry's boss. Obviously, is the founder. That gets you all the accolades. But welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Daniel.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, you're the head of Power the Future, and can you describe a little bit about Power the Future and kind of why you felt the need to get this organization going and what you guys do?
Yeah, and New Mexico is the second state we launched in, so I have a deep love for New Mexico and the 5+ years I've been going there regularly. I started the organization to advocate for energy workers in rural communities, and that's where New Mexico in this last presidential election and what happened in your state is such a great place to start a conversation. Energy policy is made in DC. It's made by energy advocates or environmental groups that live in San Francisco or New York City, et cetera. But the decisions are felt by people in Eddy County and Lee County or in the Alaska North Slope or in coal mines in West Virginia. And they often don't have a seat at the table. Their jobs are the ones that are most affected, their livelihood, their family, their communities. And so I started Power the Future to be an advocate for them because it's rural energy workers who produce our energy, and they're often neglected when we have these highbrow, high profile energy conversations. So that's why I started it, and that's why I love New Mexico, because you are the second most important energy state. I mean, sorry, Texas is number one, but you're the second most important energy state in the nation, and critical to our economy, our national security, our way of life. And your energy workers deserve better than what they're getting.
Absolutely, and on a per capita basis, we may punch above Texas's weight, although I haven't exactly run the numbers, and it would obviously depend on what other forms of energy are included. But we'll take number two. That's okay. In the Olympics, that does get you a silver medal. It may be the first loser in a lot of the world, but in the Olympics it gets you a silver. So we'll take the silver medal. And it's obviously a big industry here in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about New Mexico briefly, but let's start off with, of course, the presidential election. Donald Trump, the most pro-energy president in my lifetime, I believe, and somebody who really takes on the issue of energy and makes it his own and does pro-energy things and has a proven track record of that. Won the election, and we saw a pretty good shift to the right, away from people who have been skeptical of American energy. Now,
Yeah.
uh, why don't you just provide a brief overview of how you thought energy issues played throughout this election?
Yeah, we did an energy series, a video series called Energies on the Ballot, and we pushed them nationwide. We're a 501(c)(4), C3, C4. I know, like yourself, we don't take sides, we don't advocate, we don't endorse, but clearly we educate on energy issues and we talk about candidates' positions on energy. And this video series we did really wanted to highlight to the American people, energy is on the ballot. As much as there's all the after action wondering, what happened with this demographic and why did Latino men vote this way? And everybody has to buy milk and eggs and butter and pay rent, and everyone fills up their car, and everyone sees how expensive life has been for the last couple years. Everyone saw that nationwide electric bills are up 30%. I mean, that's huge. Credit card debt is at an all-time high, and it's because food was at an all-time high. And that's all energy, right? It's not just the gas in your car or the natural gas heating your home, but it is everything that is manufactured, transported, irrigated, all agriculture, everything in the world requires energy. And as the past administration made energy expensive, it made life expensive, and the voters took that to the election. They took that to the ballot box, and it wasn't about any other issue. It was about that life is very expensive now in America, and we have a good enough short-term memory to go back pre-COVID and say, you know what, life was better then. I want that again, and that's what they'll hopefully get.
Yeah. Now, talk about just some of the ways in which Trump and Biden, of course, Kamala Harris, I guess starting with fracking, but you
Mhm.
can talk about whatever. Uh, what was your take? Just how did you see Kamala Harris approach the fracking issue as she tried to flip-flop her way through that? Did you buy it? Did you think she just completely mishandled it? What was your take?
No, I don't think anyone bought it. I don't even think she bought it. And ultimately, that's why Kamala lost. You know, like people did not trust her because they do know her. She has been a national figure for several years. She's been the vice president for almost four. She's laid out her positions very clearly. So you take issues like fracking, where she's clearly on the record. I mean, she did that slow deep jam, whatever they call it, with Jimmy Fallon, where they're trying to get all edgy and with the music, where she says we're going to ban fracking. You know, she very clearly said, "I want to end fracking." Well, then it polled poorly, and now she suddenly doesn't. And then when you ask her, she says, "Look, I've been very clear on this," and she gets a little testy. Um, she called climate change the greatest existential threat the nation faces. She didn't mention it once on the campaign trail. When is an existential threat not an existential threat? When it polls poorly, right? And if it was an existential threat to the likes of which even Biden said, you know, Nazi Germany, the Soviet threat of nuclear war, I don't remember the 44 election, the 40 election, but I'm pretty sure FDR talked about the threat of Germany, right? I don't think he stopped talking about it. And the pollsters were like, you know what, FDR, like, let's talk about something else because this isn't flying with. He talked about existential threats. Reagan talked about the existential threat of the Soviet Empire, as did Carter, right? So an existential threat is an existential threat, period, and yet it wasn't popular in this election, so we just don't talk about climate change. Look in your own wonderful state, and like I said, we'll get to New Mexico. When did Martin Heinrich talk about climate? They don't talk about it. Why? Because it polls poorly. So suddenly, and that's where the energy issue, as you can tell now, I'm starting to get angry, Paul, and we're only 5 minutes in. That's where the energy issue becomes so critical because they tinker with the lifeblood of our economy and our national security. They play around with it, they poke it and they prod it, and they do their little experiments. And when they screw it up royally, then they backtrack and they're like, whoa, 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 hey, still vote for me. I'm actually a good guy. And that's why they all lost and handedly.
So you did make the connection there, and I just want to make sure to draw not a dotted line, but a straight line. You believe that energy and the Biden policies on energy were one of the main factors
Yes.
involved in the inflationary spiral that we saw in that time, right?
100%. Yeah. And we still see it. We still see the price of oil. Now it's come down, right? Last I saw, I don't know what it's at this exact second. I think it was around $68 a barrel. That's still very high. And the administration was trying to say, well, they have come down from their all-time high of 130. It has come down, but historically, $68 a barrel oil is high. Rig counts in New Mexico are still not where they were pre-COVID. They're going back up, right? Last I saw, we were at 111 statewide. That's still down from where we were. So all of the Biden policies uh, uh, made oil very difficult to produce. Their leasing permit, their issues like Chaco Canyon, right? They made oil and gas very difficult to bring to market, and that's why prices are still so stubbornly high. Yes, we are producing a lot of oil right now because it was drilled 6 and 7 years ago. But the futures market is saying we don't look good going into tomorrow, and that's why oil is still $25 a barrel more expensive than it should be, and that's all because of bad policy.
All right. So I know Trump has made some statements about uh, his plans to change various policies. The one I really have looked at is the LNG export permitting. I
Yeah.
see LNG exports as a win-win-win. And if I know the View people may not have understood this concept, but if Kamala and I was honestly trying to advise her on a good policy issue to differentiate herself from Biden, I would have said LNG exports, because then she could have talked about how LNG can wean Asian countries off of coal.
Yep.
It can mitigate against Russia in Western Europe, and of course, it can create American jobs and tax revenues. I am assuming that you're confident that that'll be one of Donald Trump's first moves, and just talk about LNG, what
Yeah.
it is, and how that all works.
Yeah, and you actually saw European Parliament leaders talk about purchasing natural gas from America so that they don't have to purchase it from Russia. Now, your audience is saying, "What do you mean purchase from Russia? I thought we have an embargo." We do. We have an embargo on Russian oil and gas, and what Russia does is they sell it to India, which is not part of the embargo, and then India sells it to France or Italy or Germany at a markup, right? So Russia has not sold any less oil or gas. They are just using mediaries to hide the fact that they are not buying it from Russia. And everyone feels good about themselves, right? Like we have a ban on Russian natural gas. We just bought it from the India and the Chinese, and we're paying, $55 more on the markup. It's just pure stupidity. The natural gas was a winning issue for any president, so much so even President Obama supported natural gas back in the day. But the climate left is never satiated, and that became their new punching bag. They feel like they've won the war on coal, or they're winning the war on coal. So natural gas was the next one they went off to. Just in the simplest of terms, uh, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, a pipeline from Western PA to Baltimore to build a LNG export terminal, right? To transport natural gas, you have to liquefy it. You can't really transport a gas very well. So you need these enormous facilities, uh, pipelines to hook up there, to liquefy it, compress it, load it onto tankers, bring it across to Europe. It was then Governor Larry Hogan, who just lost his election, who stopped the pipeline and said, you know what, climate change is a real threat. We're not going to build this pipeline. Has anyone been to Baltimore recently? I live in rural Virginia, but I have been to Baltimore many times. Baltimore needed the several thousand jobs it was going to provide. Maryland needed the several $billion in infrastructure revenue it was going to generate. And our European friends needed the natural gas, so they're not buying it from Russia vis-a-vis China and India, and Russia's coffers are building so that Russia can then invade Ukraine, so that America can give money to Ukraine to fight the Russian war from the money that we're giving to Russia by buying their LNG. It's stupidity, Paul, to the level that I used to have a full head of hair before I did this job. It's stupidity to the point that it makes you angry that these are the people making energy decisions. And look at the damage they've created. Look at the damage the good that has not happened, meaning prosperity in Baltimore or job opportunities, but literally death in Ukraine and in Russia. 19-year-old kids, I don't care what side of the war you're on, some poor 19-year-old Russian kid was conscripted against his will and he's dead. And his family has to deal with that because we're financing their war by buying their products because we're not buying it from Pennsylvania. Explain that to me, right? That's the level of stupidity that we've been dealing with the last couple years, and it has to end, and it has to end now.
All right, so let's talk Turkey here.
All right, I get very
LNG
heated. I
exports.
apologize.
That's okay. No, no, I'm talking. I just want to talk specific policies. Like, how do we see? What are we going to expect out of Trump? And I appreciate your fire and all the excitement and all the issues that Biden and Harris were or would
Yeah,
screw up. But so we've got, and I'm open to other ideas. Obviously, LNG exports,
yeah.
right? Will we bring the Keystone XL pipeline back, or is that a dead letter at this point, do you
I think
think?
Trump will absolutely give it all its permission. Whether or not the company decides to restart it is on them. I can't imagine the bath they took on the billions of dollars, right? Moving personnel, 14,000 people, right? That's a lot of people to start rehiring and to get into position. And that's, again, the danger of big government is this was not an easy, task. We're not building a house of cards. There's years of planning and billions invested in building this pipeline. that got shut down like that. If the company says, you know what, Mr. President, we appreciate the fact you've renewed our permit, but we're gonna forego this, that's on them. Going back to LNG pipeline, I hope that the president uses national security protocols to get this done. And the reason why is because national security protocols forego a lot of legal hurdles that the environmental left loves to do. You say you're going to build a, you say you want to cross the street and the Sierra Club's going to sue you, right? And that's all they do. They are hundreds of lawyers with hundreds of millions of dollars. And if the Rio Grande Foundation sneezes, they get sued by the Sierra Club. Using national security protocols tells the Sierra Club, go pound sand, right? The days of us litigating the safety and security of our country are done, right? And you're done. You have the right to protest, you have the right to petition, but we are not stopping critical infrastructure needs and risking the lives of our people because John Kerry's afraid of the weather. And so I hope he uses national security protocols to get a lot of these projects done, and it will put the environmental left in their place where they belong.
Well, whatever your perspective is on climate change, LNG exports should reduce CO2 emissions, not increase them. That's something that I've always thought it made sense for the left to embrace, not
Yeah.
to go after. But their
Just like
policies don't make sense anyway.
No, just like drilling more oil and gas in New Mexico, which we were not allowed to do under this administration, would make more sense than buying oil from Venezuela and Iran and Saudi Arabia. We released sanctions on Venezuela and Iran, and we're refining their oil. We're bringing it in via tanker, and we're calling this green. Why do we want more Venezuelan oil? And nothing against the Venezuelan people, but I don't want their gang members, and I also don't want their oil when we have plenty of our own oil in America. So again, the policies of the environmental left are nonsensical. And as you've seen a lot of the TikTok and Instagram meltdowns of people over the election, that's what it's like talking to these people about environmental policy. It's pure emotion, it's conjecture, and it's just absolute stupidity. And we've suffered the consequences for the last couple of years.
So land management, I assume there's going to be a sea change in the way that federal lands are handled and
Yeah.
permitting on those lands is done. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hope so. And I hope a lot of land is actually returned to the states. I am a big proponent of the 10th Amendment. I don't understand the desire of elected Democrats to make the federal land grab bigger. We know a lot about the 30 by 30 project. We won't get into that now. But the federal government does own around 12% of the land. Certain states, New Mexico is a pretty good example, but certain states like Utah and Nevada, it's 85, 90% of the state is owned by the federal government. That should be completely reversed. Right? New Mexico should own all of New Mexico land. Yes, the national parks. No, we're not going to drill in Yellowstone. No, we're not going to drill in the Grand Canyon. Just stop all of the stupidity. That's what they always say. Like, oh, you want to build condos in the Grand Tetons? No. Like, I'll be fine with the national parks. But there are enormous swaths of land that are owned by the federal government that should be returned to the states because the states will manage it a hell of a lot better than some idiot bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. To see Tracy Stone Manning lose her job will be a great joy for me. One of the few times Power of the Future ventured into the lobbying efforts, which we are allowed to do, was to prevent her nomination as the head of the Bureau of Land Management. We lost that. She has been the head the last 4 years. If you'll allow me just one more chance to besmirch her because she's an awful human being, she was one of the original eco-terrorists during the spotted owl crises in Oregon back in the 90s. She was a tree spiker. People died because of tree spiking. And when they were caught, she ratted on all of her friends to the feds, cut a deal, and she got off scot-free, and they all went to jail. She went into academia. She became a climate change activist, and she was hired by the Biden administration as the head of the Bureau of Land Management. She's a repugnant human being, and even when she leaves her job, Power of the Future will continue to try to punish her for the damage that she did to the people of Oregon and for the lives that were lost because she is a terrorist, and these are the bad people who have been in charge. Sorry, had to get that out.
That's all right. Well, electric vehicles. Is this something that Trump can go after and repeal the mandates? How
Yeah.
about some of the subsidies? Talk about electric vehicles.
Well, there is the executive order that 50% of all cars sold in America by 2030 have to be electric. No indication of how that's supposed to be enforced, right? If 50% of all cars have to be electric by 2030, does that mean January 1st, 2031, you're a Honda dealer and you sell an Accord, but now I can't sell another car until it's electric. If I sold five, Honda Pilots, can I not sell a sixth until I sell five EVs? But so again, just stupid big government nonsense. That will be repealed on day one. There will be no EV mandate anymore. Let the people buy what they want. Buy an electric vehicle if you want it, but the subsidies will absolutely disappear. I mean, the subsidies haven't worked. Take, for example, Stellantis, right? A subsidiary of Daimler, Chrysler, Fiat, whatever the name of the company is, no longer American in name. Stellantis took hundreds of millions of dollars for the Inflation Reduction Act. 2 months ago, it closed its plant in Michigan and brought 1,400 jobs with it to Mexico. Right? That's what subsidies do for you, right? Ford has lost $4 billion on production of EVs. They've already said they are no longer going to make the Ford F-150 Lightning, the electric EV that Biden drove around the parking lot, because no one's buying it, right? And it's not good for anything, unless like your wife's Mini Cooper is in the shop, then it's a little bit less butch, right? Otherwise, why would you buy an F-150 Lightning? And so these are silly products that were designed by unserious people, not the free market, and they're subsidized by government. And when those subsidies disappear, there's still going to be some hurt. Don't get me wrong. EV manufacturing companies are going to fire people, and that's going to be hard because these are our fellow Americans, and they're going to take to the airwaves and they're going to say, it's people like you that I lost my job. And that's tragic. We have a bitter pill to swallow as free market believers. We are addicted to fat, big government spending, subsidies, spending. That's going to go away, and it is not going to be easy. Americans are going to suffer as we swallow our bitter medicine, but by God, we have to drink the medicine before we're dead.
And I'll talk after a few minutes about how that impacts New Mexico, which of course is one of the states that's still pushing it. But how about the subsidies for those EVs? Because obviously the mandates are one thing, but the
Yeah.
Inflation Reduction Act, so-called, of course, and other federal bills like the infrastructure bill. Now those are passed by Congress. So,
Yeah.
the Trump administration will be doling out those dollars, but under a law that was passed by the previous administration. Do you think they can claw back some of that money? Do you think there's any way to shift the policy in a different direction? I know that there's also woke policy agenda items about, that certain groups have to be catered to.
Sure.
Any thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, what has been spent, we're never getting that money back, unfortunately, and that's why we're 36 almost $1 trillion in debt. The subsidies can stop. The Congress controls the power of the purse, and even though the law requires X, this Congress can make the provisions to stop the spending, and that is absolutely essential. Essential. But this is where you and I are not Republican. We are believers in free markets, and we realize that Republican politicians are sometimes just as guilty, sometimes even more guilty than Democrats, of being addicted to federal money. There are lots of subsidies that Republican governors and Republican mayors love. There's subsidies about carbon capture and subsidies about green energy investments. If that money dries up, they're going to have an inter-Republican battle on their hands, and who's going to win? Sadly, the history of our country, at least in the last 50 years, is when that type of fighting, big government always prevails. So they have a real challenge ahead of them. I want all those subsidies to disappear, but I don't necessarily think that they are going to disappear that easily. And also, and this is where I love talking to other free market minds. You and I would argue with anyone. EVs will benefit when the subsidies disappear because it will force EV companies to make a better product, right? If you really want a good EV, then make a product that is forced to compete in the marketplace. And that comes with a lot of failure and a lot of time and a lot of ingenuity. If you just throw money at it, we get a crappy product that the American people don't want. So if you love EVs, you should want the subsidies to go away, because ultimately EVs will be better in the future when they have to stand on their own 2 feet.
Any other areas of energy policy and the new administration that you want to highlight that'll be a big shift from the previous administration?
Land access and permitting. I gave a small rant of Tracy Stone Manning. I apologize I didn't mention the most important part of the BLM, which is permitting. Permitting is down around 90% under the Biden administration, and that's why oil prices are still so stubbornly high. So just having regular land lease sales, it took Governor Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, to sue the Department of Interior, finally saying it's been 3 quarters and you haven't had a land lease. What are you doing? It shouldn't have to take that type of action for the rule of law to prevail. So land lease is going to be huge. I hope in the Congress, one of the very first acts is repealing the methane tax. It's one of those things they snuck in the Inflation Reduction Act. They disguise it as methane, but really it's a tax on the natural gas industry. And like I said, if they have tried to regulate coal out of existence, natural gas is the next one on the chopping block. It's why Pennsylvania flipped so noticeably for President Trump. And New Mexicans should be alarmed at this, right? Your governor should be alarmed at the attacks on the natural gas industry. Sadly, though, I think there are just too many entrenched Democrats to realize who butters their bread.
All right. Let's leave the conversation there largely in terms of Washington and move to New Mexico, which unfortunately not quite as optimistic in terms of the outcomes, certainly not on energy issues. So,
Yeah.
uh, why don't you just kind of outline what you see having happened in New Mexico and why we didn't do what the national picture did?
Yeah, I think New Mexico has 6 year, very important timeline to change this, because obviously in the year 2030 is another census. New Mexico, the census of 2020 redrew a lot of the map, and what were reliably our districts, pro energy districts, um, have been redrawn so that they're deliberately muddied. New Mexico 2 is the best example of that. Yes, Las Cruces, tends to go more blue, but the rest of New Mexico too is pretty darn red. But then they took that little bit of Albuquerque, right, in the last census when they redrew the district, and that's enough to make it a reliably Democrat seat. And that's insanity when you think of the Permian Basin, when you think of places like Carlsbad, when you think of just how many people in Artesia and in Roswell work in the oil and gas industry and servicing oil and gas, and grocery stores that are bought by oil and gas workers, et cetera. The industry is crucial to that entire area, and yet it has, a congressman who has great disdain for the industry, and that's because of redistricting. So if I could say anything, I would say you have 6 years to try to claw back something, so that by 2030, when the maps are redrawn again, you've got a seat at the table. We did pick up, the Republicans picked up one in each chamber. That's a start. Next time, you got to pick up 2 more in each chamber. And then you got 2 more years, you pick up 2 more. And then in the 6 year mark, maybe you've got, if not a majority, you've got parity, so that redistricting doesn't handicap you even further. But yeah, it wasn't great for New Mexico. It was very disappointing, but not surprising. They drew the map that way deliberately.
Yeah, exactly. So, I, I guess the first question I want to ask about where things will go in New Mexico is that we've got less than 2 years before our unrealistic state level 43% mandate on EVs
Yeah.
will theoretically go into effect. Of course, Lujan Grisham will be on her way out the door.
How's that looking?
Uh, well, I talk about it in our conversation with Wally here. In terms of the way I see the chips falling, and of course, this will be very interesting, I think, to you if you're not already aware of it, is that widely considered is Deb Haaland as
Mm,
prospective governor of New Mexico, at least a
sure.
candidate on the Democratic side. Heinrich looks like he's going to stay put, which, of course, it would have been a disaster had he been chair of energy. Now, that would have required, of course, the Democrats to maintain the Senate. That was very unlikely, but he's only, 4 votes away from a chairmanship of the Senate Energy Committee, which would be really problematic.
Yeah.
But Deb Haaland taking over, there's questions about Ben Ray Lujan from a health perspective. Possibly MLG could jump into that seat if Ben Ray decides to hang it up due to the health issues. So Deb Haaland, obviously, as governor, would be a huge problem for our state. But talk about the EV issue specifically for those states like New Mexico, especially a smaller state uh, that's not going to turn back, at least not willingly, from the EV mandates and subsidies.
Yeah, Larry, he may have even talked about this with you and your guests before, but he's done so much work to show how not only unpopular the EV mandates are in New Mexico, but what percentage of New Mexicans drive EVs? What percentage of the governor's own staff drive EVs? The governor doesn't have an EV. Her motorcade is all fossil fuels, and of course she'll claim that she needs it because she's the governor. You know, we did a poll in January. We'll do another poll this coming January that we do early on in the year to just put the finger on the pulse of where New Mexicans are. And EV mandates were there, and they were overwhelming majority of New Mexicans oppose EV mandates, as do the overwhelming majority of Americans. So this it's to think that you're going to get to that in 2 years is just absurd. The reason why it's also in 2 years is because it's not the governor's responsibility, right? All of these mandates, all of these rules, all of these by the year 2030, I shall decree. Gavin Newsom does this all the time in California. They all expire way after they're out of office. Kick the can down the road. It's somebody else's problem, right? Someone else has to now comply with this stupid law. So, yeah, there's no way in hell New Mexico is going to have this flip of EVs in the next 2 years. I think if every EV in the nation drove to New Mexico, it still wouldn't be the necessary percentage of EVs required in New Mexico. So again, just dumb laws made by ideological people, and they don't realize the damage that they are doing. It's 2 great years for the industry to celebrate itself, to celebrate what it's done for the state. Your governor at her State of the State in a couple of weeks, even, will claim great credit for budget surpluses. She will not even mention oil and gas by name because she despises the industry. But it's oil and gas that will give the state probably a $2 billion budget surplus. That's all at risk if someone like Deb Haaland were to come back and crown herself as governor. And so the industry has a lot of work to do to remind New Mexicans, where their money comes from. And if you say, well, my aunt is a third grade teacher, who pays for your aunt? The oil and gas guy's working right now. And I have a cousin and he's a first responder. You know who pays for your cousin first responder? The guy who's working on, in Artesia on Christmas Day. They're the ones who pay for New Mexico's first responders and civil servants and government. And you want free health care and free this and free that. You know where the money is coming from? It's coming from the men and women who are working in oil and gas hours a day, 24/7. They deserve a lot more than what your governor is going to acknowledge in her State of the State.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that all shakes out. Of course, I know you guys have been following very closely uh, Michelle Lujan Grisham's solar subsidies for companies like Maxion and
Yeah.
Ebon, and of course, the latest information is that Maxion is supposed to break ground in New Mexico in Albuquerque in the last quarter, the fourth quarter of 2024. We are well into the fourth quarter. Not quite at the 2 minute warning yet when it comes to 2024, but we're getting there. Unlike Tim Walz, I can actually use football metaphors. I'm not talking about run. We're not running a pick six here. As
I tried to run a pick six when I played high school football, and I would tell the coach, "We're going to run a pick six," and then I was benched. So yeah,
yeah, if you were a quarterback, you probably would want to run the pick
run a
six. But
pick six.
yeah,
Brilliant.
that definitely not something you want your quarterback or your coach stating anywhere near the huddle or publicly. But anyway, I digress. Sorry, I couldn't help but take that shot. But we'll see what Maxion and Ebon do. But
Yeah,
obviously, kind of my 10,000 foot or 50,000 foot points is if you ran these solar companies, which is what we're talking about, solar manufacturing, and you couldn't make money during the Biden administration, I don't expect that these folks
yeah,
are going to be doing very well during a Trump administration, which I expect that he'll take a pretty aggressive approach to some of these subsidies for wind and solar.
yeah.
What is your take on both kind of the national and ultimately the state level prospects for these companies?
There's a reason why wind and solar are predominantly made in foreign countries. China, because they're the cost of labor is non-existent, right? You can hire 7-year-old girls, you can use forced labor, you don't have to celebrate the new federal holiday of Juneteenth. There's no paternity leave, there's no paid leave, there's no sick leave, there's no insurance, there's no OSHA. So it's very cheap to get labor, which is why we make everything in China, and that's bad, right? And that has to be reversed. We have to stop offshoring. We have to stop subsidizing slavery in foreign countries for cheap goods. But also, we make a lot of the wind products in Scandinavia and Europe, and it's the same deal. It's just subsidized by the European taxpayers, and so a lot of the wind companies are Scandinavian, and that's all subsidized as well. So it's either slave labor in China or subsidized in Europe. To make these products here in America is going to require a shift. They can't survive without federal dollars, and the federal dollars are going to have to dry up. So when I said earlier there's going to be a bitter pill that we have to swallow, that's exactly what I mean. There's some guy who's going to go work for that company, and his job is going to disappear, and that's going to stink because he's our fellow American, and he didn't vote for one that he just wanted a damn job, right? But that doesn't mean we can't take we have to forego the medicine, and we have to stop subsidizing failure. Wind and solar are failed industries. They do not exist without government subsidies, and they do not exist without government mandates. They're expensive. They've made the grid weak. Our electric bills have gone up 30% nationwide. There are thousands of men and women who got employed in the wind and solar industry because of the Biden-Harris administration. I don't want to see them suffer, but gosh darn it, the nation can't survive if we continue to push this failure of wind and solar on people. So the money will dry up, but it's going to be painful, and I am sorry that pain is going to be inflicted on these people.
All right. Well, any predictions as to whether Maxion, you expect that these companies will ever get their manufacturing facilities built in New Mexico? I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but
Yeah.
do you think they'll actually go through? Do you think one of them will, one of them won't? Where do you see this whole
I mean,
conversation going?
I think as soon as Trump won, companies like that had an internal conversation and have to decide what they're going to do. I'm sure they have representatives talking to the Trump transition team or trying to, but I could easily see that project getting scrapped. And like it, several projects getting scrapped because they only exist with the power of government. That's also why these green groups spent hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars on the last campaign because there were trillions of dollars at stake. And the only debate that Harris and Trump had, she bragged about it. We've spent over $1 trillion on this green economy, right? That's a lot of damn money. And if your business is on the line because you want some of that $1 trillion sugar, well, you're going to fight tooth and nail to try to get it. So yeah, I could see any of these companies just scrapping it and saying we'll set up shop elsewhere.
All right. Well, anything that we missed, anything you want to make sure to highlight, of course, give out your websites and how people can get in touch with you, or you and Larry, or get
Yeah.
involved with what Power of the Future does.
Daniel at powerthefuture.com. If you want to shoot me an email, if you want to tell me I'm an idiot or tell me you don't like, I'm in Pittsburgh right now, by the way. That's a real shot behind me. If you tell me you hate the Pirates, I'm actually not a Pirates fan. I just happen to be in Pennsylvania for work. But Daniel at powerthefuture.com, or just our website, powerthefuture.com. Talk to us about these issues. I get to New Mexico multiple times, almost every month. I'll meet with you in person if you can. If you want to talk about what we can do, my only last thought is don't let the resolve disappear. Like a lot of people fought this election cycle. A lot of New Mexicans thought you could maybe flip the state. You wanted to support the industry. You're a little disappointed, but the fight is not done. The fight is really just beginning. And then when things start taking off again, boys and girls, sing the praises of the industry and don't back down. When oil and gas start booming and jobs are taking off, prices are going to drop, right? Oil is going to get back to $55 a barrel, but we'd much rather make profits on volume than on price. And when that happens and things are going gangbusters, remember why and fight for it, because those guys are going to fight to come back into power and put you out of business. So the fight is just beginning.
All right, Daniel Turner, Power of the Future, New Mexico, or Power of the Future and Power of the Future, New Mexico.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
it was great,
And
Paul. Thanks for having me on.
you're welcome. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.